Hi, this is Brad Jersak, and I'm here to do an interview with my friend LaToshia Everson for the Institute for Religion, Peace, and Justice and for the Clarion Journal. And she is a friend of mine. I met her in Oklahoma City. What a magnificent set of pipes you have singing. Oh my goodness, it was glorious. I was enraptured, honestly. But you're actually from Greencastle, Indiana. And why don't you go ahead and tell us what you're up to there and who
Yeah,
you are, all of that.
so you may not know where Greencastle, Indiana is. It's kind of in the middle of the country, Midwest. It's a pretty rural town, right? So we have about 15,000 people, and that includes our students at our university, DePaul University, which is where I work. So I work with our study abroad office, so I get to send all of my lovely students away for either a semester or a short-term program in the winter, so in January, or in the summer in May. And I get to see them come back and be these really cool, well-learned, well-cultured students. So that's what I do during the day. We also have a church, my husband and I, here in just outside of Greencastle, still very rural, and I sing in a band. So as Brad mentioned very kindly, that compliment, I absolutely love singing. It's such a creative outlet for me. We sing at church, we sing kind of all over. We play in restaurants and clubs and festivals and kind of everywhere, and it's so much fun. It's been sad because we've not been able to do that recently. I think our last show was actually right before St. Patrick's Day. So that's been sad not to have that. We've tried to do some virtual things, but it's just different not having an audience and feeling their energy with your energy. So, so recently I'm a part of our local NAACP, and I'm on the exec board for that committee, and have been involved in lots of different community organizations that concentrate on voting and social justice and making sure that Greencastle is a good place to live for all people. And so as of late, I've been that's been ramped up for me, right? Because of all of the things that we've seen in the news and all of the things that have been happening. So lately, I've been spending a lot of my time talking about racial inequality and going to protests and doing what I can to help educate people on the issues.
Well, that's why I'm here, to be educated. I really believe that the call to make wise the simple starts first with me, and especially on this issue. And I realize that there's a lot on your plate, and I really appreciate that you take the time, and I consider it a beautiful act of friendship. Thank you.
Goodness, I'm honored that you would want to talk to me about it. I'm not an expert, but I certainly have perspective and try to read and be involved, and so I offer what I can.
Yeah, you do certainly have perspective. Why don't we start with, we'll start out personal, and then where we'll head is to like really basic definitions for people who don't realize how terms are loaded and what they mean. And then we'll move into more specifics after that. But I'd love to hear your personal story, what it's like to be a Black woman in America. And well, first of all, is that a label that you're good with? Do you prefer Black, African American? How do you identify?
I prefer Black. I think that's a great term. To me, it has so much culture that represents it, and so I'm happy to be called a Black woman.
Okay, and what does that mean to be a Black woman? Because I think that says a lot about culture. Like we're not just talking about pigment here or your
Right?
biological sex. That's a very full phrase, isn't it? So tell us about that.
It is. It definitely is. So I think for me to really explain it, I start a little bit with my personal story, right? So I'm born and raised in Greencastle, Indiana by a single mom who has two daughters, myself and my younger sister, who's 4 years younger, who has special needs. So my sister has Down syndrome. My mom, had my sister in 1986. There was no amniocentesis at that point, so she had her not knowing that she was going to have special needs. found out obviously the day that she was born. And so a little bit of a shock, right? And so my mom, being a single mom with a special needs daughter, worked 2 jobs. My responsibility was I had to help my sister once she was of school age, get ready for school, get her on the bus. And then when I got home, help her get off the bus and kind of wait for my mom to get home. And so I say all of that to say I was raised watching a very strong Black woman making ends meet, doing what she needed to do to make sure that we were provided for. And not only that, my mom was so great about, she never wanted me to feel different from any of my schoolmates, right? So it was like anything that she could do to make sure that I had not just what I needed, but like if she could get me that extra thing that was name brand, you know, like she wanted to do that. So I grew up with a very strong mother who didn't graduate from high school. So she got pregnant with me at the age of 17 and didn't graduate. And so when I think about all that she's done and the great example that she showed me, I'm so proud to be a Black woman, to have that history and character, because I feel like there are so many Black women that have the exact same story, right? That their mother and their mother's mother, and so it's this really great heritage and lineage that that I come from. I was raised with the same kids all through school, kindergarten through 12th grade. In a small town, like I said, you're kind of with those kids the entire time, and really didn't experience any kind of like overt racism until I was maybe 7, 8 years old. And then again, through another family that moved into town, probably 5th, 6th grade. So I think to be a Black woman in America means that I have faced both racism and sexism, but I am trying to be a super positive person, so I always want to turn that over and say like, yes, but I'm a Black woman in America, and like I feel empowered and strong, and that I can do anything because I've seen so many Black women do that before me.
That's really profound. I think that actually may be the key, that those who rise above that an identity rooted in powerlessness and start flowing from their true identity realize I can do anything. I am not powerless.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'll overcome. And it's one of the reasons I asked you to be on here, is because you exude that. And I would want that for all those who would want to reduce this to a victimization kind of thing.
Right.
I realize there's actual victims and real overt racism and subtle and systemic and all that, but it doesn't feel to me like you're under it, right? You're and your mom showed you how to be an overcomer.
Exactly. There is a resilience that I think the Black community has that is beautiful, and I wish I could put it in a bottle because it is so powerful. So I'm happy that I exude that, because I really want that to be something that people see.
Now, can you tell me a bit about more the subtle ways that racism underlies our culture, ways that I might not even know that I'm complicit, right?
Sure. So I think that in the most subtle way, at least in North America, and I would say probably most places, is that just kind of the everyday status quo, that there are things that are happening in our spaces that we live and we don't even think about or maybe recognize them because it's just the way it is. Right. And I think for so many people who I hear say, why is this just now happening? I'm like, no, this isn't just now happening. This is always happening. So I think in subtle ways, it's that the status quo, right? That it's just, it's always happening, but nobody's maybe really aware of the complicit nature that they're in, because it's just the norm. And when I think about, ways that we may subtly be experiencing or participating in racism, I also think about I don't know if you've seen this or not on Netflix, but I think it's wonderful. There's Killer Mike, who is part of a group called Run the Jewels, has this really great kind of documentary on Netflix. But one of the things that he does is he wants to live black for 3 days. He is an African American man. He's black, but he wants to live truly black for 3 days, which means that he can only buy black products, only use black products. And he has a really hard time doing that. So I think in terms of being complicit or participating, it's also looking at where we put our money, you know, what we're supporting, who we're supporting. And that could be buying black or the opposite, right? That you're supporting systems of racism or companies that are overtly racist, and we're putting our money there. So I think it's really important that we think about where our dollars go, who we're supporting, what's supported. And I would say probably in terms of education, because that's the field that I'm in every day, there are so many things, so many inequities that I see. I'm at a small private liberal arts school. We have a lot of wealthy families, and we also have very poor students. And so just seeing the ways in which they're living their everyday lives, it probably is not anything overt to anyone else, because it's not like somebody's yelling a racial slur down the hallway, but just in the way they live their lives, it's so different.
Okay. Now I noticed that your husband doesn't look like you. Is there anything you'd like? Now, is this even, is it a bad phrase to call it a mixed marriage, or what or an interracial marriage? I'm interested in what your experience of that is, or like challenges to that in times like this. Is there awkwardness to it, or is that another thing you've transcended somehow?
No, absolutely. I think there is. I think Joel, you know Joel, so
Yeah.
he is like one of the easiest people to be around. He's like a 100% champion anything that I do. So I am so blessed in that regard to have this partner who is with me, I feel like every step of the way. However, saying all of that, because he's white and I'm black, you know, while we try to understand where each one of us is coming from, neither of us can ever be the other person. So yes, I mean, there are challenges or awkward moments, or the thing that we often say is, okay, tell me more about that, you know, to where we try to come together so that each of us better understands what the other person is trying to say, or what they're feeling, or, you know, whatever the situation may be. Having an interracial marriage in a rural town can be challenging, because there are people who are overtly racist. So let me just give you an example. So when Joel and I moved into our house, we, we moved in, everything was great. We have neighbors that are down our street. One of our neighbors, one of the closest neighbors to us, was pretty overtly racist. We knew that because we're from this town and we know them, we knew that. And so every year in our little neighborhood, there was a block party that they hosted. We didn't get invited to the block party. So here's everybody going, having a good time. Their house is right next to us. They're having a good time. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, well, we didn't get invited because we're a mixed couple, and there's no way that they would allow me there and you by partnership. So they moved. They were only with us, they're in our neighborhood for probably a year, and then I think they were like, we can't be this close, so they moved. But so in a rural town, I think maybe I don't know that we experience it more, but it's a small place, so we definitely see that. I think most people in the community know us, so we may not hear things that may be said, but certainly that is a challenge. I think Joel and I, we've been married 19 years, so I feel like we know each other pretty well, and handle those situations together when they arise.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because like he will never be able to identify as black, so he has to learn how to empathize, right? And I think that that's where your marriage becomes a powerful model, is because that's what's available to me. Can I learn to empathize? And so
Right.
knowing him helps me with that, and your journey together. Let's now shift into some of the really basic definitions. And just for those listening, here's where we're going to go. We'll talk about racism, systemic racism, anti-racism, white guilt, whiteness, white fragility. These are all very important and specific words right now. So let's launch in. What I've noticed that some folks say, well, I'm not racist because I don't hate any black people or something like that. But racism isn't just about prejudice, color prejudice. There's a power element, or so. How would you
Absolutely.
the idea of racism?
Sure. So in my opinion, I think if to define racism, we actually have to begin by defining whiteness.
Okay.
So white is a cultural concept where white people are deemed to be superior for the sole purpose of oppression, right? It's not anthropological. It's not anything physically that's true. It is, in fact, a lie, but it is this cultural concept that people believe. So without this concept, to me, we don't see racism, or we don't see it in the way that we're experiencing it now.
Whiteness is specifically, it's assumed racial superiority. That's what we mean by white supremacy. It's not that I'm white. It's that I'm assigning privilege to my whiteness against
Exactly.
the other in oppressive. Okay, good. That's very helpful.
For the sole purpose of oppression, right?
Okay.
It's not for anything else other than to be able to dominate.
Yeah, put you in your place. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
So, power is kind of to me, the primary feature of racism. Racism being discrimination based on implied perception about skin color through the lens of whiteness. So I think you have to start with whiteness because that's the lens it's coming from. It's a concept, an action, an idea. But I would say that individual racism is not it's not created in a vacuum, right? It emerges from a society's foundational beliefs, the way that they act, how they do things. It's manifested in organization systems, government, etc. So that's kind of a big thing to say, like, racism to me through the lens of whiteness is oppression through whether individual racism, I don't like you because you're this color, because whiteness tells me that you're less than me, or through systems or institutions that say we're going to, because this group is a different color, disadvantage them in some way.
Okay, so systemic racism then is when you have a disadvantage specifically because you're black. Is there more to systemic racism that you want to say?
Yeah, so I think given the concept of whiteness in America, systemic racism is the overarching governance by whiteness that disadvantages Black, Indigenous people of color. And that spreads out to different areas, right? So we're talking about housing, education, wealth distribution, the prison system, all of these systems. And it differs from overt racism or discrimination in that there's no individual intent that's necessary. It just seeks to serve those privileged by the system. So it seeks to serve whiteness.
Yikes. Well, now that you say it out loud, it's both more obvious and more evil, right? So two other words I wanted to cover. You pick the order. So what's anti-racism, and then what is white fragility?
Yeah, so white fragility is what I've been experiencing for the last 2.5 months as I'm talking to people. I like to just read the definition because I think it's so powerful, and it was coined by this person. So Robin DiAngelo, who wrote the book White Fragility in 2011, coined the term as describing the disbelieving defensiveness that white people exhibit when their ideas about race and racism are challenged. particularly when they feel implicated in white supremacy, because nobody wants to be the bad person, right? And what I try to convey to people who I can see are experiencing white fragility is that I'm not saying that you're racist. I'm saying that the system was built through whiteness to suppress and oppress people of color, right? So, yeah, white fragility, it's that feeling, it's that automatic defensiveness that white people have when they may feel implicated in white supremacy. And when white people are confronted by the conversation of racism, I think their immediate defense is, but I'm a good person, I'm not racist. It's like what you said, I'm not racist because I don't hate people who are Black. It's about more than that, and hopefully from some of these definitions people will understand that. It's about understanding how the system works and allowing your defensiveness to come down, to be able to see somebody else's experience, their lived experience. And I want to just take a second to talk about white solidarity, and I know that that's not something necessarily that we were had pinned out, but I do believe it's important in terms of talking about white fragility, because white solidarity makes it makes white people forbear correcting one another in racial situations or racial missteps to preserve the peace, which is difficult because that makes genuine allyship really hard. So if white people aren't willing to confront white people when there's overt racism happening, that makes it really hard to make genuine, true allies that will actually help to dismantle the system that's causing problems, right? That's causing all of this.
Okay. So in this context, white solidarity is a bad thing.
It's a bad thing.
Right.
Yes.
I got it. So it's when I'm unwilling to call fellow white people on their racism if I won't call them on it, I'm entering that kind of white solidarity that makes me complicit. Got it. Okay.
Exactly. And those are tough situations, yes, but you know, in doing the work that needs to be done and being a true ally, you call that out. So in that way, white fragility holds racism in place, and in the refusal to acknowledge your own participation in racist systems, you become part of the problem, or you become complicit. And so to me, the ideologies of that are like hyper-individualism and the white American dream and the confidence that you can be completely free from bias. Like, no,
No.
you can't.
Okay, we didn't mention this either, but I connected to this, you've used the word ally or allyship, right?
Yeah.
And it'd be good to identify what that is, but also like connected to that, I think it was your friend who had posted something just saying, if you see somebody self-proclaiming as an ally, just run away from them.
Yes.
I am recognizing this, that now and I connect this with virtue signaling or something like that, that I'm a proud ally, and now I'm better than everybody, and I'm very progressive, and haven't I arrived? And now, in fact, I'm going to go correct everybody because I'm now the police for you know. It's just
Right.
So I see the ickiness of that, and yet I want to be a good ally. I don't even think I'm ever going to claim to be one. I'll let you decide if I am. I honestly mean that. I think that's better. It's like, am I an ally? Ask LaToshia. She'll know. Maybe I'm not. I'm certainly not going to wave that flag because I see the people who do becoming really weird. Okay, so what do you want to say about all of that?
So I think I would say that right now we're probably seeing a lot of what's called performative allyship, which is posting on social media and hashtag and showing up at protests, but people who maybe haven't done a lot of the introspective work and aren't willing to do the things that don't gain them any kind of notoriety or publicity, right? It's easy to go on social media and repost something or say Black Lives Matter or whatever, but you're not really doing anything to help the cause. So we're seeing, because it's trendy, a lot of performative allyship. And to those people, I would say, well, we'll see where we're at in a year. And if you're still there, then maybe we can have a conversation about what true allyship is. To me, true allyship starts with someone doing the work of anti-racism. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then maybe you have other questions. But so to me, anti-racism is that movement from I'm not a racist to I'm against racism. So it's a practice, right? It's the active process of identifying and eliminating systemic racism by changing systems. So this is people doing real work, organizational structures, policies, practices, attitudes, so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. So anti-racism is an active way of seeing and being in the world. And I love that because to me, that's transformative. It's not just, this is who I am today. It's who I am today, tomorrow, next week, next year, 10 years from now, my lifetime, right? So it's a transformative thing. Diane Flynn from Diversity Matters says it like this. She says, it's more indicative of a process of coming to a healthy and functioning sense of a white racial identity. And I love that.
Transformative versus performative. Okay.
Exactly. And to me, that's where I start seeing true allyship. So we all have kind of those circles of friends where it's like they believe you and they are sorry, but like they're probably not going to be inconvenienced to do anything, you know. Right. Then you move kind of closer in, and it's those people who are like, absolutely, I'm reading books, I'm challenging my own whiteness, I'm trying to look inside myself and see where I need to do cleanup. It's moving. It's like I said, yeah, that transformative way of being. It's a practice, and just like anything else with practice, you're never perfect, but you keep trying.
Yeah. Well, those definitions are so helpful. I just think that helps the conversation when people don't assume wrongly what you're meaning right. by the words we use. And this is so empowering then in terms of communication. I want to shift now to all things protest, nonviolence, love, anger, hate, you name it. So I'll start here. When I see the demonstrations, first of all, here would be I want to introduce it this way. Considering we are hearing words like revolution, when I see how big these demonstrations are, it is unbelievable to me how nonviolent they have been. Like to see so many people turn out, don't tell me that the Black community couldn't have showed up with a massive amount of weapons. They really right. could have. If this is so scary, right. then like I could have seen people armed to the teeth overrunning cities, and they didn't. And this tells me that they're about the resilience. See, when you don't feel completely powerless, and you do have that sense of resilience that you've grown, then you have the guts to show up unarmed. Right. And I think people need to take note of how many people were in the streets who were not observably armed like you would see at some of the other kinds of demonstrations we've seen. And I just want to really name that and affirm it. But okay, so in fact, before I go on to my question, do you have anything to say about that? Like, how do you account for pretty radical peacemaking in the protest movement among Blacks like that? Why isn't it like the French Revolution where they're just slaughtering people and beheading them? What's different about your group?
I think it's part of it is nature, or inherently, like I said, that resilience, but also that hope. And we have a lot of the Black community. We have a lot of great examples before us that kind of showed, like, if you want to make a change, if you want people to hear you, then this is the way you need to show up. And so I think that's something that we're actually doing. It's for me, when I think about like the protests that I've been to, while there's been some fear, right, that I'm like, okay, if this goes bad, here are the, like Joel, here are the things that you need to do. Or whatever, you know, my NAAC president, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to this protest today, so I'm just letting you know in case you see something on the news or I end up in jail or whatever. So it's not that that isn't there, but I think there's some transcendence to say, like, no, this is the way in which we want to show up. This is the way in which we want to be perceived. And so it is very peaceful. It's very organized. It's very intentional. So I think that, gosh, I wouldn't even, I may be like stammering when I'm trying to answer this, Brad, because I can't even imagine that we would do that. So I guess maybe that answers your question. Like, that wouldn't even be something in my mind that my black community we would like arm ourselves up and go out. Like that's not even something that comes into my mind.
It can't be thought. That's there was George Grant was a Canadian political philosopher. He would say that it just can't even be thought. It's you don't have the neural pathways for the so that's good. I mean, wow, it's really impressive. And so where I want to go next with that then is the difference between love and anger and love and hate. So I want to say that here's my perception, and I'd like you to kind of speak into it. My perception is that love gets agitated and it agitates. Love can be angry. Love gets angry when injustice is done and people are oppressed. And so I don't believe anger is the problem, and even an expression of anger is an appropriate way to love. That over against the temptation to hate. How do you navigate the hard path of loving your neighbor while honoring your grief and you're expressing your anger at centuries of long willful injustice without being hooked by hatred of the other?
Right. Well, Jesus.
Praise Jesus. Yes.
That's my answer, Jesus. No, I think you're absolutely right in the way that you're looking at or thinking about explaining love and anger. I think absolutely people are angry. That's why we're seeing the demonstrations that we are. That's why we're seeing the mass numbers across the world that we are coming out, standing up, speaking up to say this is wrong. So I absolutely think anger has a very well-deserved place, and it does. It causes people to continue to apply pressure, to continue direct action, to continue to speak out, to sign petitions, to write emails, to make phone calls, because they're angry and they want to see the system change. So I think love and anger, absolutely. The hate part, so I honestly, I said Jesus, but I think faith has something to do with it, in the whole example of Jesus and the, what I'm going to say, insane way that he was able to deal with people. That example of loving your neighbor and not allowing yourself to get to that place of hate. So this is kind of a convoluted way, but for me, I think it would be easy, right, to hate and to say, like, this has been happening for so long and nobody wants to listen. And but hate doesn't help me, it harms me. And so if I'm thinking about, I want to make real lasting change, hate can't be a part of my world, because it's only going to harm me. It's not going to help me in the causes, the goals that I have. And hate doesn't allow me, it stops me from engaging with people who, I have been saying this, I don't want to persuade you, because I need you to be who you are, not who I am. But I do need you to see from a different lived experience. And so if I were to allow hate to stop me, or to be inside of me, I wouldn't be having those conversations. And my kind of mantra right now is because there is a lot of energy that's expended on people who don't want to get it, is, you know, if I see an opening in somebody, even if it's a sliver of an opening, that's something to work with, and I'm willing to pour myself out into you. If I were to allow hatred, people who hate me, or for myself to begin to hate people who hate me, I don't think I would be of any good, honestly. I don't think I could be in the way of Jesus. I think, you know, the approach is the kindness of Jesus and the love of Jesus, to help people see what my heart is. Because I honestly think even people who maybe don't know me, if they're like, well, all of this is just a bunch of malarkey, if they can hear the sincerity and the love and the kindness that's coming out of that, maybe it's going to cause them to listen, and listen long enough to maybe think differently, or to maybe see in a different way. And that's what we need. So for me, and this may not be for anybody else, but for me, if I were to allow myself that place of hate, I might as well just stop, because I'm not going to be able to do anything.
Okay. Yeah, you can see how, like, if the goal is anti-racist, then you're not going to turn a racist around by feeding hatred into it. That actually energizes that very demon, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a cynicism around the effectiveness of love, but when you describe it, I'm like, it's love is strategic then, even, isn't it? It's about transforming the very, those people, bringing them out of the darkness so that they stop inflicting their oppressive kind of acts.
And honestly, as Roar would say, seeing Christ in all things, right? So even people who, my neighbor, the neighbor lady that wouldn't invite us to the block party, you know, it's like, okay, I know this is who you're being, but I know that that's not who you are.
Oh.
And so trying to constantly remind myself Christ in all things, and that if I'm saying, look, we are all humanity, so even if this isn't your lived experience, it's my lived experience, so it should be your lived experience. You should be as outraged as I am.
Yeah.
So if that's what I'm preaching, then I better be extending that same grace and humanity to other people.
Well, and certainly if one of the roots of racism is hatefulness, then we don't want to become like the hateful, like that. Satan can't drive out Satan, right?
Right.
We didn't rehearse or preview any of what I'm about to ask you on. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I'd ask you to try to think out loud with me, because it's about Jesus. When in Canada, we've got, you know, the louder, the more overt kind of racism that is more obviously systemic is towards our Indigenous people, right? And so, and you know, I'm very proud father-in-law of an Indigenous woman. In those conversations, sometimes Jesus gets lumped in as part of the racism, in that it's like, well, European colonial settlers,
Right.
They colonized us in every way, including faith. And so to be anti-racist is to try to expunge Jesus away too, because the settlers brought them. I don't hear you trying to expunge Jesus from, like, in fact, he's become your ally in a way that is necessary.
Yeah.
How might you respond to that issue? I'm totally putting you on the spot, but maybe I'm just saying, you know, why don't, because Jesus was part of the whole slavery thing, right? It's like,
right, absolutely, yeah. Yes, and I think that it can be hard for people. It's like the thing that was used against them. Now I'm supposed to love this and welcome and embrace it. That doesn't make any sense. So I guess I can only speak to what I've seen. My grandmother, her would be her great grandparents, right? Were picking cotton in cotton fields. And they're from my grandparents are from Kentucky. My mom's mom. My grandmother moved here with her husband to Indiana for employment for a job that my grandpa got. So when I see them, I knew my great grandmother. I can only say that they must have seen or felt or known in a different reality from what they were being told.
Yeah.
So for those people who said, you know, this is slavery is okay because the Bible says so, and I can be your master because the Bible says so. There was another reality for the slaves and for those descendants that said no, because my experience is that God is loving, God is just, God is on the side of the marginalized, God. And I have a relationship of our own wherein I know I'm being held, and this isn't what you're saying it is. So
that's really good.
Oh, thanks.
Well, I'm
I've
thinking
seen,
he's a liberator. What do you know? Let my people go and all of that. Remember that? I mean, it's a higher reality. It's a in that sense, out of your oppression, you got a more beautiful and more true image of who God is. You know, the God who
I,
sets slaves free, right?
yeah, I absolutely think that. And my grandparents on both sides were Christians. My grandfather on my dad's side was a pastor, but the beauty of relationship that I saw from them and the faith that they had, the faith and the hope, you know, I say this a lot, like I am my ancestors' wildest dreams realized.
Wow.
And, you know, the hope and the faith that I saw them have, knowing the things that they had experienced, which were so far worse than what I've experienced, says something. It says that Jesus has to be something different than what they were taught.
Yeah. So really, I mean, well, and he's a person. What do you know? And in fact, some would say a person of color from the Middle East, not a white slave trader, right? So,
Right.
So just to give you a heads up, I'm looking at landing in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
So one thing we didn't talk about is part of the protest movements has now focused in on defunding the police, or I think a better word for it would be, this might be more winsome, reallocating funds away from militarizing the police seems really reasonable to me. Like, I'm not saying have no police. I'm like, they don't need a tank in the streets of America, you know, like,
Correct.
so are you for that idea? Are you like the defunding movement? Is that, do you see that reasonable in the face of like the systemic racism of police forces?
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the brutality that we've seen, I don't know, this is probably a broad statement, but I'm not sure how you couldn't be for defunding the police if you are so against this brutality that's happening. And I think you're right. I think semantics matters, and using the term defunding has put some people off. But I think that's somewhat by their own choice, because we use the word for other things. Defunding education, defunding healthcare. So it's not like new, and it's not like Black Lives Matter or this movement created it.
Right.
So I agree with you that it maybe could be more palatable, but I'm also the type of person that I'm like, it is what it is. Understand what it is, and then you'll be fine. So yes, I'm completely on board with defunding. I think that if people understand what it is and that it's a reallocation of overfunding, so it's taking the funding that's overfunding that would be used for militarization and weaponry, not like, you know, diversity training or things like that. It's taking that money and it's reallocating it to different areas. And I think, honestly, if the police were super honest with themselves, and some of them are, they would say, yes, let's do it, because I'm not a social worker. I'm not a mental health care professional. You know, I'm not a medical worker. And it would give money to those organizations to help step in place of them when the situation calls for that. So to me, it's like, hey, let's get some of this work that you're not trained for, that you're actually is not your job, away from you. Let's pull some of that funding to give it to the people who can actually make a really big difference in those situations. And really, in terms of communities, I think, boy, doesn't that really put your money where your values are? It's just reinvesting it into the places that should emphasize what your values are already. So again, yeah, the terminology, okay, but if you just take a second to like look at what it actually is, I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't really think the terminology is, I agree with it. Once you explain it, it's so reasonable that to worry about what we call it is probably just willful, like that.
Yes.
Then it, and in fact, kind of rooted in racism itself. So
correct. I was just about to say, and an argument that is a thinly veiled, display of racism, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, mine too. I think that because you can feel the spirit behind it. All right, I want to address two double binds that I face, and then to hear your gospel to the Black community. So I want to share the two double binds, and when I've shared them before, I have been told that I was displaying white fragility, and we're friends enough that I know that you love me enough to call it what it is, and I like, please do if that's what's going on.
Sure.
If you ever see me go to preach and my fly is down, I want you to tell me your fly is down, right? So we're going to do that now. Not that, but so one double bind I run into is sometimes I hear, don't speak for us. And also, your silence is complicity.
Right.
I am completely willing to, I want to navigate that, but I need a guide. And here you are.
Yeah.
So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think the thing that we have to remember in all of this is emotion is really high, and people, all of your feelings are kind of at the surface. And so I've heard other folks say that as well, that, I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm saying the wrong thing, so I'm just not going to say anything. And I got yelled at because I wanted to, try to help, but I'm not Black. And so they're saying, hey, you need to let the Black people lead this. It's a lot. And I think in what is a heightened state of emotion, sometimes things are said, and it may not be the absolute truth. So what I mean by that is that for me, I would rather you show up and get it wrong than to not show up at all. Right? I can work with if you maybe are, say the wrong thing or whatever. I would rather you show up and get it wrong than not show up at all. I do think that some of the emotion behind what maybe you've heard is because for the Black community and for us, I think that we're asking for white folks, to do a little bit of pre-homework, right? So to go and to read some things, do some introspection, do a little bit of self-work before you show up to the conversation. So you can show up and listen, but maybe don't show up and talk until you've done some of that work yourself. So reading White Fragility, reading How to Be Anti-Racist, reading some, even just articles, let alone books, to help you get into the right state of mind, the right posture to be in those spaces. What we have seen, Brad, and I feel sorry because I think that some people are experiencing the backlash from other people, because I think what we've experienced is that people aren't willing to do that work, but they want to be in the limelight and they want to be the leader, they want to be in charge. So oftentimes people who have really good intentions and good hearts that are like, okay, what can I do, are getting the backlash from the people who weren't like that, who weren't willing to do the work, weren't wanting to show up to be a listener, and just a support in whatever whatever way is needed. So I think that's part of it. And so for that, I would say for anybody who's like, hey, I want to be a part of this movement, I want to help. If you are white, do some work ahead of time before you come into those spaces. It's going to help everybody. It's going to help Black people know that you're actually serious and you're not just here to be a performative ally, but you're here to really to learn and to make a real change. And
I'm hoping that this right now is some of that research for people, right?
Yes,
Researching means listen to what LaToshia just said. That's research. But I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say that I read this in Untamed as Glennon Doyle was, trying to start showing up to spaces that were for the support of Black people, but she's white. And so navigating that. And because I'm Black, I like to hear from that experience because I don't know what it's like to be white and show up in a Black space. I know what it's like to be Black and show up in a white space because I'm in that almost all the time. But in this way, to kind of understand what that feels like. And one of the things that she says is listen before you speak. And I think that's so helpful. We all have a lot of opinions and we all have lots of things to say, and you're in academia, so lots of people want to wax on about whatever they have, all these ideologies, and that's wonderful. But in certain spaces and in certain times, I think just listening before you, even if you never say anything, those first couple meetings, just listening and hearing that lived experience is going to be super helpful. And again, it shows people your intentions and that you're not just here to take control and to say, whatever you want as a white person. There, again, just to reiterate, there are a lot of feelings. And personally for me, sometimes I am like, you are white, you do not know what it's like to have experienced the racism that I'm talking about. So maybe just be quiet for a little bit and just listen. So, I mean, I try to be super nice when I have that experience. I'm like, okay, thank you. So maybe just listen for a little while. But I think that's really important to know that too. Emotions are just super high. And so sometimes people are just going to kind of say things. And hopefully we can all allow each other a little bit of grace.
Yeah, well, think about this. What if I get told my voice doesn't belong just because of the color of my skin? Yes. Now you get to know what it's like. This is the best. You know what I mean?
Right.
I hope that our recording doesn't stop after an hour. I'm just going to keep at it because we won't quite be done by the top of the hour. The other thing is you've been super gracious. This is the other double bind I've had. It's like I've heard you shouldn't assume anything. You need to be asking the Black community. But then I asked the Black community, it's like, stop demanding answers from the Black community. You should be doing the homework and you should figure it out. They're exhausted, don't you know? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But I took a chance with you that despite your exhaustion, so I kind of get that, but you can see how it's a double bind, right?
Yeah.
Ask, don't ask.
Yes, and that is a wrestling. Here's what I think that Black folks mean when they say that. And maybe I'm speaking for all of them right now, for all of us, but if I'm wrong, they'll let me know. Yep. What I think we mean is this. Do the research, and then don't just speak if you don't know something because you have done the research. Ask a Black person first and allow them to tell you the answer or tell you their experience so that then you can relay that to whatever extent you're relaying it. And for me, when people come to me with questions or tell me about this and they've done no work, no homework, no education, no nothing, in an already stressed out environment, I'm like, yep. Now you're stressing me out more. So I think that's what it is it is exhausting. This work is any kind of activism. I mean, environmental, racial justice, all of it. It's exhausting work. So yeah, we're exhausted, and we're living Black in the world. So, you just have what feels like a lot all the time. And so, yes, exhausted, but I think there's a difference between people who are asking because they've educated themselves and people who are asking because they don't want to do the work themselves.
Right. I mean, so I get that in like, I don't get it, but I get it in this little analogy. Here's my little analogy. It's like I'm writing a book and there's a word somebody doesn't recognize. So like they email me.
Right.
Why couldn't you just tell them? I'm like, it's called Google. You have Google.
Yes. Yes.
So what would be a good book to start with? Let's say someone says, she's right, I haven't done my homework. Where should I start? Can you suggest a resource or two for us?
Yes, I would start with white fragility, because I think it's really important to understand the feelings that you're going to have, because they're probably inevitable, so that you can continue to do the good work, right? If you can't start there, you're probably going to stop when you feel things that are uncomfortable. So White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, a white woman, I think because she can identify, it's really helpful to read that. And How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi is also really good. So if you're wanting to say, how do I move from being not racist to racist, that's a great book. I think those two, that's what we've been telling, kind of everybody in all of our circles, the church, etc. Those are two really good places to start.
So White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And what was the second one?
How to Be Anti-Racist.
Yep.
And that is by Ibram Kendi.
Ibram Kendi. Okay.
Kendi. Kendi.
Kendi. Got it. Very good. Well, it looks like we're still recording, so I have time to ask you our final question.
Sure.
As long as you're not late for supper.
No, Joel's not even here.
Okay. All right. So my preface is a Bible verse. Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, sight to the blind, cleansing to the leper, etc. Favorable year of the Lord," all of that. And what that tells me is that while the gospel is the story of Jesus, the gospel also comes to different communities in a particular way. So what is the gospel that Christ is preaching to the Black community right now? What's the good news for you? And is there any for me?
I would say yes, there is good news for you, because good news for us is good news for you, right?
Yeah.
I think that the gospel to the Black community right now is that there's freedom from oppression. So in thinking about, this movement, civil rights, all of the work and energy and blood and lives and sweat and tears and emotion that's been happening for hundreds of years, is that there's freedom from oppression. There is true freedom from oppression, and that in all ways, right? In all ways that we need to be freed, there is true freedom from oppression. And I think it's beautiful, because to me, in that saying, in that feeling, there is a true awakening of collective sin, of understanding the implicit nature with which we are a part of this collective sin. So to say, well, there's freedom. I'm sure that people have been saying that forever, right? But to me, this feels somewhat different, in that there is freedom to oppression, and also a cultural awakening of collective sin, to say, this is how we're implicit in this, and so here's how we need to dismantle or change it. And to me, that is true freedom. When you see true allies that are waking up and saying, okay, we're standing alongside you. You know, you've seen, I'm sure, in some of these protests where white people are standing in front of the Black people to say, like, I am them and this is me. So there is no difference between us. And it's just been really something that feels different to me in what's happening right now. And so I would say the good news is that there is true freedom from oppression in all of the ways that we need to be freed. And when we're all free, boy, what a beautiful world we live in, and what a
Yeah.
beautiful world we have. Yeah, so that's the good news for you too.
Thank you. I received that.
Yes.
Do we have an altar call? Because I say yes. I want that. I want that. Well, LaToshia, thank you so much for the time you've given, the thoughtfulness you've put into this. That I just feel, I feel like I feel empowered, but at the same time humbled in the sense that I want to show up with less assumptions. And I'm so grateful for guides like you on the way. I'm truly grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to have been a part of the conversation, and obviously always happy to share my perspective and to have these conversations. Thank you.
Well, I'll give you a breather and we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good one and enjoy your supper.